Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Bakersfield, San Jose, California, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. Recent news out of Australia about COVID. This is Malcolm Roberts. He's a senator for Queensland, Australia. He says documents released under Freedom of Information a few days ago revealed that former Victorian Premier Dan Andrews made the decision to impose the 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. COVID curfew on Melbourne entirely on his own. His COVID cabinet then rubber-stamped his decision. Now, we know here in the United States, Fauci has admitted that the whole social distancing thing was not based on science, and they just made it up. And they also lied about masks. We know that. I have the video proof of it. And so all the lockdowns then were based on nothing. And so all this stuff was based, they were just making stuff up. The curfew led to terrible suffering, suicides, failed businesses, and failed marriages. It was the worst harm inflicted on the Australian people by their own government since Federation. We now have proof that there was no justification for the curfew. The email thread shows health authorities looking for reasons to support the curfew. None of those reasons are fact or evidence-based. They amount to guesswork. The curfews joins a long list of measures that harmed and killed everyday Australians with no evidence behind the decision. Other bad decisions, including banning ivermectin, wearing masks, social distancing, and of course the most absurd of them all, one could get COVID standing up but not sitting down. One Nation opposed these measures at the time. We demanded the scientific advice upon which they were based. It is clear to us now that we never received any evidence in support because there was none. These measures were political, designed to impose the level of compliance necessary to ignore one's own doubts and sense of compassion for the suffering they were causing, and to wait for a vaccine that was presented as the savior but turned out to be as harmful as the virus. There is so much more to come from the avalanche of Freedom of Information requests and medical papers which, taken together, prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Australian people were knowingly and deliberately misled, and as a result, people died. One Nation repeats our call for the Royal Commission into COVID to be held immediately. Now, I just have to correct him on one thing because I'm on YouTube. The vaccines were safe and effective, and they certainly didn't stop transmission or contraction, but they certainly kept people from getting seriously ill or dying in the hospital. That's according to the YouTube science. So I have to give that there and let Malcolm Roberts know he's wrong about that. But this is a real story. This is right in the Australian newspaper. Emails show Melbourne COVID curfew not based on health advice. So
how can we still be living in a world in which these statements can be offered up, and yet consequences are there none for those responsible for all of that harm? How can it be possible that we can know this, and we do, and that we can say this, and we now can, and yet still there are no consequences for any of the people that were just making stuff up? I mean, here in the UK, they had Wine Time Friday in 10 Downing Street. At the height of the lockdowns, when all of this nonsense was out there about you had to wear a mask when you stood up to go to the toilet, but you didn't have to wear a mask when you sit down, all of that was out there. All of that fear porn was out there. And yet they were happily partying together, ignoring all of it behind closed doors, because they knew they had access to the science and they knew that there was nothing to fear. That's why they were behaving that way. And all of this kind of stuff is why I am so skeptical now that there was anything in the air circulating at all. I'm very, very suspicious about this stuff about the lab leak being confirmed, because in the context of all of that, all those things that were done, curfews, lockdown, all of the harm causing, the rollout of these experimental gene therapies and pumping them into people and terrifying people into taking them, all that stuff about, what kind of a disease is it if you don't know you've got it until you take a test, and what kind of a vaccine is it if they have to make it mandatory before you'll take it. Now, in that context, now coming out and saying, "Oh, there was a leak from a lab," those naughty people in Wuhan, they cooked something up and they were careless with it. So now do you see, we might have got some things wrong and we might have been a bit heavy-handed, but we had to do something because it was coming our way, this disease, and we had to get the magic bullet ready, and we had to take all sorts of controversial precautions. It's the get out of jail free card for these characters, which is why I am so on the point of absolutely accepting that there was no such thing as SARS-CoV-2. There was no such thing as COVID-19. I don't think there was anything circulating. I think there was the usual respiratory viruses. I think there was flu and all of the rest of it. But it was what was done in the name of COVID-19. COVID-19 wasn't dangerous, even if it was a real thing. You had to be over 82 with comorbidities before it posed you any threat, whatever it was. And I'm 99% certain it wasn't anything at all, but it wasn't dangerous. This lab leak story is dangerous because if they can persuade people now that there really was something and they had to act, then it's the 24-carat copper-bottomed get out of jail free card. We had to act. I don't know.
They gave the guy. So I was on Twitter the other day, and there's still people who are still deathly afraid of COVID. You know that, right? You see that they're still wearing masks. Still wearing masks in their car when they're alone. This is real. I know comedians who wear masks in the green room at comedy clubs, and they're around 4 people, but they take the mask off right before they go on stage in front of 200 people, which makes absolutely no sense. Either you're afraid of the virus. If you're consistent, if you went on stage with the mask, then I'll go, well, at least they're super afraid of this virus still. They still have that. But you can't be afraid of it in a green room, but not afraid of it on a stage.
So, you love the bit, if you're flying, if you're involved in air travel during that time, you had to practice social distancing in the queue.
Yes.
And then they pack you in like sardines in the plane.
Yes. That again, but the guy, so I was on Twitter and someone was tweeting out about how people aren't aware of how dangerous COVID is, how it gives you heart trouble, how it gives you kidneys and liver. It's all these things. The more you get COVID, the worse it is. And I said, well, then, wow, you should really be angry at that guy who funded the Wuhan lab and created that virus that you're now still deathly afraid of 5 years later. But of course, no, crickets. They'll never be angry. So even if you take the government's line that was created in a Wuhan, now the government says it was created in Wuhan and it was funded by Dr. Fauci through the EcoHealth Alliance. He had to go through a CIA cutout to do it because they had stopped doing that dangerous research. And nobody's upset at Fauci. In fact, they gave him a pardon that goes back to 2014. So I can't square that, how people are still deathly afraid of COVID, but they have no anger at the guy we now know, according to the government, funded the creation, the science that led to that virus, if that virus existed.
If you believe that, I even read, I've listened to credentialed people questioning the reality of gain of function. That gain of function is a dream of Bond villains, but it's not necessarily demonstrably been achieved. There are so many. There are the fear porn that's out there, and you're seeing the psyop was so effective, such that people, I see them all the time as well, driving on their own in cars, and the people that are still walking the streets, keeping away from people and wearing these face coverings, because the propaganda was so effective that it got into people's heads and it's living there rent-free to this day. But none of that, I think, is persuasive any longer, that there was anything to fear. Hence the Wine Time Friday parties in Downing Street, just as an example. They weren't frightened. They were at the heart of the storm, and they weren't worried about being in one another's company. And if we all accept that there was something, then we hand those responsible the get out of jail free card.
I mean, it was like it was like COVID was a test to find out how far they could push people to the point of rebellion, and nobody rebelled. Only a slight minority of people rebelled, and it was easy for the establishment to silence, slander, and discredit those people.
Jimmy, I was when it was all still in play. I was with work. I was having to fly up and down from Edinburgh Airport to Heathrow every Friday and come back on a Sunday. Come back home on a Sunday. And I used to have to go through Heathrow Terminal 5, and I wasn't wearing a mask. I wouldn't wear a mask, and that was uncomfortable enough because everybody in the airport was masked. But then I would get on the plane, and I would go through the umbilical corridor, and then the cabin crew would be there, and they would say, and they'd be masked, and they would say, "Sir, you're not wearing a mask." And I would say, "No, I'm not wearing a mask. I don't wear a mask." And they would say, "Are you exempt?" And I used to say, if I was asked, I used to say, "Yes, I am," because I figured I was exempt, because I'm exempt from nonsense. But then the worst of it was I then had to turn right and look down the cabin of the plane, and there'd be like 299 people sitting with masks on, and I didn't have a mask on. And I'd have to find my way to my seat, get into my seat. Invariably, people sitting beside me would ring their wee alarm bells and summon a steward and say, "I don't want to sit here," but it'd be a full flight. There was nothing anybody could do. And what they didn't know, if that wasn't bad enough, that I was sitting there without a mask on, I hadn't taken any of the jabs. I used to for the hour-long flight from London back up to Edinburgh, I used to think, I'm like Typhoid Mary on here. These people might open the door of the plane and throw me out at 7 miles up. If they think it's scary that I'm not wearing a mask, wait till they find out that I'm not jabbed. It was insane. It was really, I mean, I had never up until that point really feared the threat of the mob. But I used to sit on those planes and think, I'm actually in physical danger now, not from COVID and not from authority. I'm potentially in danger because of my fellow citizens who are so frightened of this bollocks.
So let me just finish this quick little story. In short, the Victorian opposition has obtained an email exchange under Freedom of Information, which shows that then Premier Daniel Andrews announced Melbourne's first COVID curfew before it was recommended by public health experts. The email shows that the health department officials did support a curfew, but not advise the cabinet to impose it. So what's next? The opposition is calling on Premier Jacinta Allen to explain the government's action. The Victorian opposition says it's obtained evidence showing that Andrews' Labour government decision to enforce night curfews during the coronavirus pandemic was not based on health science. The government said it did what was needed to protect Victorians when it banned 5 million Melbourne residents from leaving their homes without authorization between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. during lockdowns in 2020 and 2021. Melbourne was the only Australian city to be placed under COVID curfew, which coincided with the state government declaring a state of disaster due to outbreaks. A state of disaster over a virus which, if it exists, has a less than 1% fatality rate. The Freedom of Information documents seen by the ABC reveal an email exchange between former Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton and Public Health Commander Dr. Finn Romans. After the first curfew was announced in August of 2020, they revealed they did not propose the lockdown measures, although they did support the move. The idea of a curfew has not arisen from public health advice in the first instance, Dr. Romans wrote. In this way, the action of issuing a curfew is a mirror to the state of disaster and is not occurring on public health advice, but is a decision taken by cabinet and announced today as an important step in the response. In his response, Professor Sutton said, there appears to be merit in it limiting opportunities for transmission, perhaps especially in high-risk cohorts. The opposition's upper house leader, David Davis, has been involved in a 5-year legal battle to access COVID lockdown documents. He said the email exchange clearly showed it was Daniel Andrews and his cabinet, which included now Premier Jacinta Allen, who made the decision to impose the restrictions, not the health experts. What it shows is late in the afternoon, after the curfew had been announced by Daniel Andrews at a press conference in the middle of the afternoon, that Finn Romans seeking approval from Brett Sutton to declare a curfew through the use of the Public Health and Wellbeing Powers Act. Both powers require scientific decision-making, proper decision-making. It's clear that the decision had been made by Daniel Andrews prior to any of the scientific information being presented. Mr. Davis said the exchange contradicted Mr. Andrews' repeated claims during the pandemic that his decisions and announcements were based on health advice. And of course, the impacts were just unbelievable, right? Suicides, mental health problems, businesses closing. In the United States, 41% of all black-owned businesses were permanently shuttered because of the COVID lockdowns.
So again, how can this be? How can we be dealing with this now, and there are no consequences, and there aren't going to be any consequences? You know, that's the really galling bit. Dan Andrews, he was a legendary figure. You know, he was on the television every day. We were getting reports on his actions in Australia, here in the UK, every day, as he became more and more drunk on his power. You know, handing out more and more draconian measures that caused all the harms that you're talking about, and yet. It's demonstrably the case that he was just sort of sticking a wet finger in the air and seeing which way the wind was blowing and making his own decisions. He wasn't acting on scientific advice. But across the piece, it's a tissue of whoppers. It's lies all the way down. It's not turtles all the way down. It's lies. You know, back in the States, you know, the emergency use authorization, as you know, that was predicated on the necessity to demonstrate that there was no other way to protect the people but with the products that were coming out of Pfizer and Moderna and the rest. And that's why they had to demonize ivermectin.
Yep.
Because ivermectin was out there. It was, 5 billion doses. It was a
cheap. It was very inexpensive.
Medicine that had been applauded around the world. All of the rest of it. It was safe and it was effective and it was demonstrably beneficial and efficacious in the context of COVID-19. And we know that now. We know that it was known. The people who were operating with this bogus EUA, they knew that if word got out that something like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine would have been efficacious for people needing to be treated for whatever it was they were calling COVID-19. It's all lies. And yet, is anybody talking about consequences, real consequences across the piece for, hundreds, thousands of badge-wearing officials, politicians, and the rest that destroyed lives, ended lives, made lives miserable? And the best they can come up with now is that it all leaked from a lab in Wuhan.
Well, when you lie at the behest of the establishment. And when you commit atrocities at the behest of the establishment, apparently there is no price to pay ever. No, because there's no one there to hold you accountable. It has to be.
But look at you. Look at us. As you've said, you get things wrong and you get forgiven. But if you're right, you tell the truth. You're never. No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah,
the people that stood up and told simple truth, or at the very least asked questions, legitimate questions that are, frankly, most of them are to be answered to this day. You, me, and the rest will never be forgiven for that, for having had the temerity to do that. Where these people that took these actions unilaterally and ended or destroyed lives, they got promotions and honours and bonuses and they've just moved on to the next big job.
Yeah, like I've said on this show many times, I can forgive my friends for being wrong about COVID and buying the propaganda, and even for their atrocious actions during COVID, but they'll never forgive me for being right about COVID. It's the craziest thing I've ever lived through.
Even now, like I said earlier, we hear all the time. We're always just waiting to hear the next story about some 40-year-old or 50-year-old that's had a stroke or a heart attack, or they've got some hitherto unseen neurological condition, and you stand and even now it's still bad etiquette. I still can't quite work up the nerve to say, how many jabs did they take?
Yeah, it's bad etiquette.
That's still, you can't say that. And GPs don't ask, general practitioners don't ask that of people going into their surgeries presenting with all sorts of conditions. It ought to be the first thing people are asked. You're having your third stroke and you're 45. How many doses of Pfizer did you take, just out of interest? But it's still non-you to ask that.
Well, it's interesting that most people aren't taking the COVID boosters, right? So the uptake of the COVID boosters is at an all-time low, and I'm going to guess it's somewhere in single digits. And so at some point,
Yeah, but the children, though, children who can't really make those decisions for themselves,
right?
They're still getting it.
But the interesting, so that, to me, what that tells me is that at some point, most people did start thinking for themselves. They did start rejecting what the experts told them, and they did start doing their own research because they stopped believing the FDA, the CDC, the government, and the politicians who are telling them to get the COVID boosters. They stopped believing them, and they stopped acting on their advice. So at some point, they all decided, I think they're full of shit, but they still won't be angry at them being lied to for 3, 4, 5 years straight. It's just everybody just wants it to go away because they can't accept that they were hoodwinked in such a big way.
It's too big. It's too big. It asks too much of people. It's like the thing you asked me about earlier about the load-bearing myths. There are certain things that people have trusted for too long now.
Yeah.
That to let it go would mean reevaluating multiple other entities
yes.
in the world around them. It's too big. And if you've got somebody out there who took 2, 3, 4 doses of the vaccine and they now might be contemplating regretting it, they'll clutch at anything that's offered to them that might reassure them or get them back to the place where they can persuade themselves that they did the right thing. People don't want to accept that they got taken in and they self-harmed. People don't want to accept that. And it's bizarre to me, as you say, why aren't they saying, I mean, because people, offered a 50-50 chance. People might make a decision at the time that then turns out to have been the wrong decision. What is so wrong about just accepting for yourself that you made the wrong decision and you won't do that again? But when you factor in that you were psyoped, that you were propagandized, that you were lied into that position, if when those gene therapies had been offered, if the authorities had said, look, we're in a pretty tricky situation here, we're not quite sure how dangerous this thing is that might be circulating among us, but we do have these. Now, it's risky. Be like the plot of a movie, be like Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman. This might be your best chance, but there could be side effects because we haven't had time to check everything. But your body, your choice. Would you like to take this? And some people would have taken it, and a lot of people would have said, no, I don't think I will. But everyone was propagandized into it, and it's no surprise that the vast majority of people felt they ought to do it. Because if they weren't doing it to save their lives, they were doing it to save granny, or they were doing it to protect their children. There were so many ways in which people were strong-armed into taking these products. I don't blame anyone for taking it at all. The propaganda was massive. I mean, it was the biggest crime committed against humanity.
I agree. And it's amazing for me to watch people who I respected in journalism just let that story go right past them. They won't touch it. And anyway, but Neil, I appreciate you making time. I know you had a stressful day today, so I appreciate you taking time to talk to us. And
I realize I've been terribly ranty, Jimmy.
No, it's good. It's good.
I've been unforgivably strawy.
No, I enjoy it. That's why I wanted to have you on the show. I like when you get ranty. And I want everybody to, I'll see you when we come to Glasgow, June 11th. Look forward to meeting you. And I want everybody
tell you how much I'm looking forward to that. Any of your team coming as well?
Yes. Steph will be with me, and Mike Timpson will be with us. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Trudy and I will look forward to that enormously.
And how's your YouTube show going?
Well, I must say my subscriber numbers have flatlined somewhat. I'm a bit plateauing. I'm plateauing, I would say.
Okay.
Because I do keep harping on about the unpopular things like these experimental gene therapies and unpopular positions on the Ukraine war and the slaughter in Gaza, and it doesn't always.
I'm with you. I'm right.
Doors open.
I'm right in the same wheelhouse as you are. Same thing. Yeah. It's the people don't want to hear it, and people don't want to hear about our free speech being squashed by Donald Trump in the United States at the behest of Israel and Zionism. And but that's I got to stay true to myself. I'm sure that's why you talk about what you talk about, what I talk about, what I talk about. We talk about the same things and from a very similar perspective. But
I couldn't sleep at night. That's what, and I couldn't. The main thing, I've got 3 kids, and I did what I did at the time because I was worried about the threat I thought all of it posed for them, and if I hadn't done it and if I hadn't taken the stand, then I wouldn't be able to forgive myself, and I'm not about to walk away from it now.
Right, I'm with you 100%. I keep talking about it. I'm not going to stop talking about it, and the lie of the Ukraine war, and in fact, I'm going to talk about it right in the next segment. So anyway, Neil Oliver, I really appreciate it. Everybody check him out on Twitter at The Coast Guy. Check out his YouTube show, and we'll see you next time. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Lovely, Jimmy. I'll be happy to come and join you and chat with you anytime you like.
Okay, appreciate it. Good luck to your dogs. Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Bakersfield, San Jose, California, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.